Hello. Now, you'll be a bit surprised that I've got a video here showing you how to stand up and how to sit down. But there are lots of plays, restoration comedies, Shakespeare, Noel Coward, Tom Stoppard, Oscar Wilde, George Bernard Shaw, plays that are done in America every year, which involve playing a British aristocrat. And British aristocrats move in a different way to the way Americans move. Now, the last thing I want you to be thinking about is how you move all the time when you're on stage. You want to get on with your acting. But there are 3 little moves which I can teach you now, which may help you feel like an aristocrat, and they're useful to know anyway. And I sometimes think that in the modern films of Kate Blanchett, they sometimes have a shot of her just standing up and sitting down for no other reason than that it just looks so bloody wonderful. And it's that kind of movement which I'm going to teach you. It may help if you realise just how differently British people move to Americans, even though I don't want you thinking about it all the time. An example of this is that a few years ago, the National Theatre in London was casting a production of the musical Oklahoma, and they were searching for someone to play the male lead. And this was the National Theatre in London. It was a huge production, very, very impressive thing to get into, and they could ask anyone in the world, literally anyone in the world, to consider playing the role. And there were 3 casting directors, and one had found Hugh Jackman from Australia, actor-singer, even though he was becoming something of a film star by then, and one had found an actor-singer from South Africa, and one had found a multi-Tony Award-winning actor-singer from America. And each of these 3 casting directors wanted their actor to play the lead in this production of Oklahoma in London. And at that point, one of the directors of the company walked in, and he was listening to them, and he said, "Isn't there a British actor-singer who could play the part?" And famously, all 3 casting directors laughed for about 2 minutes non-stop, until he realised he was just being incredibly stupid, because you, with a few possible exceptions, you certainly can't easily get a British guy to play the lead in an American musical, because they just look wrong. If I stand up and sing Oklahoma, it's just yucky and awful, because unless I work on it very, very hard, because the idea of proclaiming Oklahoma as the future that I want, and that my family are going to achieve the American dream in it, and the hopes for Oklahoma, is just foreign to a Brit. And my great-grandfather chose the presidents of 4 African countries. I mean, we sit back on having had our dream of having ruled the world, and Americans can't do that. And it's this huge difference in the way in which we're able to move and Americans are able to move that is fundamental to this point of appearing in British plays, and these 3 little moves that I'm going to teach you. The first is how to stand up and sit down. If you sit on stage sideways to an audience like this, on the edge of the chair, the largest part of your body is from here to here, the largest part that's visible, and you look as though you're pregnant, and it doesn't look very elegant. And if you sit back, then when you go to stand up, you stick out your bottom as though you were getting up from a toilet. The idea of sitting down with elegance is that as you move towards the chair, you turn and back into it so that you can feel the calf of your leg against the front of the chair, so that you know exactly where it is, so that when you do sit down, right on the front edge of it, you don't miss it and slip onto the floor. So you know exactly where the chair is, and you lower yourself and you sit on the front edge. Now, if you were doing a restoration comedy play, you would be wearing colourful stockings, and as you sat, you would display your legs, and when you go to stand up, you would swap your legs around again, and all sorts of little movements which you may or may not feel like when you come to doing such plays. But the basic point about just standing up is that when you come to stand up, make sure that one of your feet is underneath your seat, so that when you go to stand up, instead of having to lean forward, you simply press against the floor. So you stand up and you're still elegant. And similarly when you sit down. So that's all there is to it. You simply put your foot underneath the chair and are able to lift yourself up. There's one other move which Americans find awkward to do, which is the bow. And the reason it's difficult is because some people misunderstand what a bow has to be. I'm sure you've seen people at curtain calls of shows, and some people bow humbly to the audience's applause, and some people keep their heads up, clearly proud of the applause that they're getting and smiling at the audience as though it was all for them. Well, I'm going to show you an extreme bow, the most extreme bow in any kind of play ever. And then you'll see how a simple bow becomes quite easy and natural for an American to do. It may help if you imagine that, this being a restoration comedy play, that I'm wearing extravagantly beautiful clothes, incredibly expensively made, unbelievably colourful, and that I'm wearing over a long curly wig which cascades around my shoulders, a large brimmed hat, and from this hat trail feathers and ribbons. And as I enter a room and wish to draw attention to the fact that I'm coming in, I take my hand to the front brim of the hat and I lift it back so that it stands like a halo behind my head, and I bring it round, and I may, if I want to, sadly bring my elbow for a split second in front of my face, but then bring it round again and make sure that the people over here have seen me and the people here have seen me. And even if I don't have a hat in my hand, I might do this with my hand, showing myself off. And if I have a hat, and then place it back on my head from behind. So the whole idea is not of bowing humbly to this person, but of bowing with gracious pride. Now, this sense of being important encourages me to tell one other short story that you won't hear anywhere else. It's about talcum powder, and it may help you as it helped an extremely famous British actor to gain his confidence on the stage when he was beginning to lose it. In the middle of the 17th century, there was a fashion which lasted for 5 weeks, and it's been forgotten ever since. There are lots of fashions that only last 5 weeks. There was one in Los Angeles 18 months ago that celebrities, a similar word, celebrity, aristocrat. Anyway, that celebrities had suits made in Hollywood that were slightly too small for them. It was a big fashion for 6 weeks, and lots of people were doing it, and then suddenly they stopped doing it and disappeared, and I've never seen it done since. Anyway, in the middle of 17th century Poland, there was this fashion, and it was to do with talcum powder, and it was to do with confidence. And this is something you can imagine in 3 seconds when I finish the story, maybe changing the whole way in which you feel about yourself. These aristocrats in Poland had their servants grind up talcum powder so that it was even finer than normal talcum powder is. So that it was so fine that it hardly had a centre of gravity anymore. It just floated there. It was almost a gas. It was so fine. And they had shirts made with frills here. 3 or 4 frills, shaped like cups. And they would have the talcum powder placed very carefully into the folds of these shirts. And just as today some people can take a cigar or a cigarette and blow a perfect circle of smoke, these aristocrats learned to, with their 4 fingers, to flick the 4 cups of their shirt frills open and create a perfect sphere of talcum powder, which would hang in the air as they stood there. They had a sort of planet of their own. And it was a hugely popular fashion for these 4 or 5 weeks, till I think they started coughing a lot and getting asthma and stopped doing it. But the idea of walking on stage and knowing that you have your own planet here, you know, never mind about the size of the earth or the sun or the moon, you know, you are a star. There's the phone, so let's see who that is. Hello. I'll tell you when you come here. Right, Sean. Bye for now. So there we are. The point of the story, the point of all this, I've kept wanting to say this particular thing for a long time, although it may of course mean nothing to you. Because when I was a completely hopeless actor at the age of 19, when there was one kind of part I could play, but I really couldn't understand anything that I was doing in acting, and someone told me about this particular fashion in Poland, and suddenly, from nowhere, I acquired a confidence, however absurd it may seem. And of course it just happened at the right time for me, and my telling you that it worked for me doesn't mean it's going to work for you. But I'm just trying to encourage you to see that it is quite a significant story anyway, and that the idea of already having achieved your planet, never mind your American dream, is part of this air of being an aristocrat, of being a star. You stand up, you sit down, you keep your foot underneath the chair. You bow, and as you bow, you show yourself off.